The Colorado wolf. You may be wondering what that might mean, since there are no wolves in Colorado, but there once were, and they may very well be here again sometime soon. Wolves were once one of the most widespread of all of the large carnivores in North America, and their home range most definitely included the entire state of Colorado. And the fact is that wolves may well be on their way back to Colorado. In the 1990s, a consortium of policymakers and federal agencies decided that the time was right to reintroduce the wolf into the Yellowstone ecosystem in Wyoming. And that project was a huge success in at least 3 ways. First, wolves that were translocated from Canada had high rates of survival, and they rapidly spread throughout Yellowstone National Park. Second, in doing so, they thinned the number of large ungulates that had come to overpopulate that park: the bison, the deer, and most particularly, the elk. As a consequence, over the subsequent decades, a much more balanced ecosystem was restored to that area. As normal levels of vegetation returned, so did songbird, beaver, and many other species. This was particularly true along stream beds in what are called riparian habitats. Willows gradually increased in number, along with numerous fish species that depend upon overhanging vegetation, and otter that depend upon those fish. And moose! Moose also returned in greater numbers as their preferred habitats once again flourished. And third, and this is the part that has immediate relevance to Colorado, wolves did so well that they came to spread outside the park into many of the forested areas in nearby Montana, Idaho, and Wyoming. Elk had previously overpopulated these areas, so wolves did very well as predators as they expanded their range. Individual wolves have the ability to travel hundreds of miles from the areas in which they were born, and a few reliable sightings of wolves have already occurred in southern Wyoming, very close to the Colorado border. So there's a real possibility that wolves may re-enter Colorado all on their own. And this leads to a very important question. How should the people of Colorado react? Should wolves be allowed to re-enter Colorado? The answer to this question may seem obvious, at least to some.
I was intrigued to participate and meet with y'all because of the question that you posed. I think it was, should wolves be allowed? And I thought, well, for heaven's sakes, of course. Indeed, I found the question to be arrogant, assuming that we have the right to decide what should or shouldn't be.
But a negative answer is equally obvious to many others.
If I were a Colorado State legislator, I would not go forward with wolf reintroduction unless they got some very hard, concrete, in writing assurances from the feds that these are goalposts that will not be moved. Our ancestors didn't completely exterminate wolves just out of pure malice. They did it because they realized that there's no such thing as, oh, let's just have a few wolves around. Because even if you have a few wolves, very soon you will have too many wolves.
There's no doubt that a return of wolves to the wild spaces in Colorado will result in many changes, and we can pretty safely anticipate what they might be based on the experiences that played out in Wyoming. It can be anticipated that the number of elk will be reduced, and this will have an impact on hunters and on the economy of those people who support the infrastructure of hunting. And wolves will surely have an impact on ranching communities, since wolves do sometimes take livestock.
Wolves kill and eat livestock. They can bother livestock. There is some evidence that they may affect the weight of livestock, and of course weight is important to livestock. So there are different impacts that can occur.
But it is just as true that there are effective steps that can be taken to mitigate these impacts, and they have largely proven successful in Wyoming and Montana. As far as hunting is concerned, some hunters in Wyoming and Montana actually enjoy the fact that elk and other prey species are now a bit harder to find and a bit more wary. They say this makes the sport more challenging and interesting. And many of the tourism dollars that had been previously focused on elk have now shifted towards viewing wolves and other carnivores. As far as the ranching community is concerned, wolf deterrence did prove to be necessary in some areas, and compensations took place for livestock losses when they did occur. Similar adjustment will doubtless be needed in places like this in Colorado. But the main lesson from the Yellowstone reintroduction are that the overall economic impacts have been rather modest. How much time do we have to consider this question? Some would say we have very little time.
In my estimation, the advance of wolves into Colorado is much greater already than they care to admit or know about. So the repopulation, as soon as it starts to really wind up and kick out, is going to be rather quick, all by itself.
If that's true, then concern about the wolf's legal status may make it a mistake to passively watch that happen. At present, wildlife officials in Colorado would have almost no management option if a population did reestablish itself.
You need to note that the species still remains fully endangered under federal law in Colorado. As long as that applies, any naturally occurring wolf that shows up in Colorado cannot be managed at all. The term take is defined so prohibitively by the Endangered Species Act that there's not much you can do to an endangered animal without violating federal law.
Moreover, not everyone agrees that a few individual wolves infiltrating down from Wyoming here and there will be enough.
It's important to remember that it's not going to be just one wolf in 1 year that restores our ecosystems in Colorado. It's going to take a robust population that is here for a sufficient amount of time and is sufficiently distributed across the ecosystems on the west slope.
So if the arguments are correct that 1, wolves are supposed to be here, 2, there would be an ecological benefit, and 3, the impacts would be minimal, then is it enough to simply wait passively for a recolonization?
Many will say, well, wolves are coming. Wolves are coming, and they're going to get here. Mike, just be patient. I said, well, if that's the case, and you're okay with that, why in the world would you wait? If you wait, you have no management options whatsoever, because they're fully endangered. In contrast, if you take the bull by the horns and you advance translocations and reintroductions, under federal and state law, you could build out a very accommodating management scheme to make sure that you were as respectful of the needs and concerns of your citizens as you possibly could be.
That would mean capturing wild wolves, presumably in Montana or Wyoming, and then transporting them south to staging areas in western Colorado where they can be acclimated and released into the wild. In fact, some of the same people who were involved in the original Yellowstone releases are ready to help out with this project. So, there is a choice to be made. What should we think? If one accepts that position, that the practical and economic considerations can be sorted out, and that a rational management plan can be developed, then this issue becomes philosophical. The pro-wolf people argue that the wolf deserves to be here, and that this is just as much their land as it is ours. The anti-wolf people counter that humans are entitled to dominate nature and to decide what species are and are not allowed to live near us. In a real way, this boils down to just one question. What kind of species do we want to be? What kind of relationships do we want to have with the other species with which we share this planet? Can we not choose coexistence? There is an inherent value to wildlife. They do deserve to exist, and we humans can manage to live with them. There are enormous tracts of wild land in Colorado. We humans can and should share these spaces with wolves. It is time to fully embrace a new ethic of coexistence with wildlife.